We've been talking to a lot of game devs and studios lately, and I've been surprised at how many of even the smallest or solo developers are partnered up with a PR company. Seema and I don't know all that much about what goes on there, so I called up O'Dell, who I met at PAX.
All of that is by design. And, we at Stride, do that intentionally. When an outlet covers a game, when, someone plays the game before release, when a game is shown at a trade show, when the game exists in the zeitgeist, when a game exists in your mind. All of that is by design.
That's O'Dell Harmon Jr. from Stride PR, a PR company that focuses on video game developers. We talk all about what goes on with PR, how it ends up being really useful for studios of any size, and we get to hear about O'Dell himself and how he ended up doing what he does. Let's get into it.
This is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
From the New Overlords Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Ilimek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
Today we're joined by O'Dell Harmon, an account coordinator for Stride PR. O'Dell, hello.
Hello, how are y'all today?
Doing great. So this is going to be interesting conversation, and I think it's going to be more interesting for Seema and I because we don't know all that much about PR. And when I was at PAX, and I was talking to indie developers there and developers I've talked to in the past, both big and small, a vast preponderance of all of the developers kept saying, oh yeah, talk to our PR, or yeah, this is who we use for PR. And I was surprised. I was surprised even these small developers, one-person shops or just a couple people developing a game, they all were working with PR. And it seems to me, based on learning that PR is pretty important. So we wanted to hear from you a little bit about Stride PR. And so we'll start there. What is Stride PR? What does PR do for these game companies? Then we'll expand on it. And then we want to hear about you specifically and day in the life, and we'll get into that next. But yeah, so tell us about PR. Why do these game companies need PR?
So as you've already stated, I work for Stride PR, which is a video game public relations company. That's what PR stands for. I assume everyone already knows that. And, our main job is to basically allow the game developers more time, more freedom to develop their game. We take a lot of stuff off their plate so they can focus on other things, both big and small. And what I mean by that, as we know, game development can be a lengthy process that, requires a lot of time and energy. And we like to alleviate as much stress off of them by, handling their PR, getting stuff out, getting the word out about the game is because a misconception people might have. So, all the big media outlets, they're journalists by trade, they search for stories and things. But, the general news and happenings and things they should know, therefore the public should know, that doesn't just happen at random. All the game journalists don't wake up one day and go, hey, there's this new game that's coming out that the people need to know about. They know that because of people like us at Stride who work with the developers, take the time, put together a plan, put together press releases, and, then send that to the media and other sources so they can know like, hey, this is a game by a big studio, small studio, one-man team, someone fresh out of college, a seasoned vet. This is what they're working on, and this is why you should care. And, we send that out to all, media correspondents, both big and small. And if we do our job right, which we do the vast majority, 99.9% of the time, they spread the news about this game and they get informed about this game. And ideally, they get excited about this game and want to cover it more. And then from there, we become their point of contact. And they're like, hey, we want to, talk to the developer. We want to know more about this. And, just going down the line of the life cycle of the game, from announcement to release date to release, we're there every step of the way, making sure the game gets the max coverage, max visibility. And like you saw at PAX, showing the game off at trade shows to the press and public, in the best way possible.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just stop with release. You still work with them even after they've released the game, like going to shows and whatever new announcements they may want to make.
Yeah, because, after, a game doesn't, it doesn't just come out and then, that's the last you hear about it.
And then it's over.
Yeah, there's reviews, updates, there's changes, there's God forbid, a misunderstanding that needs to be corrected.
Well, that's
Because
interesting.
we see these things
Damage
happen.
control.
Yeah. Ideally not damage control. I feel most times, as 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 with anything, once somebody misunderstands something and then spreads that, and then we all seen that, even outside of video games, what that can do to the population when misinformation gets out of control. So, we
Mm-hmm.
do our best to stop that, one, to stop that from ever happening. And two, if it does happen, correct the issue, get
Yeah.
everybody on the same page. But yeah,
Mm.
once the game is released, we're still there handling things, because there's things like, influencers, which, is a big part of gaming nowadays. We work with influencers to make sure, they get codes of the games, do giveaways of certain games after it's released, big titles, people want to play, just it's all sorts of things.
Yeah, Seema and
Even
I
a
are big
physical
time influencers, so we know all about that. I influence my lawn. I influence my kids, and I think that's about it. But big time, big time influencers. Well, that's pretty interesting. At PAX, you were teamed up with a couple things. So it was sort of a few groups came together. One was Yizbrid Games, and they're a publisher of small games. And then there was
Mhm.
two games that they were showing off in their booth, and then you were there too. So the two small games were World of Horror and No Place for Bravery, and both of those look pretty cool. And I think World of Horror was just a single person developed it, sort of like a narrative comic book kind of sort of visual comic book storytelling game. So Stride at that point is teamed up with Yizbrit, right?
Yes,
For
sir.
Yeah. So do you team up with both publishers like that and individuals? I know, and all different sizes too, right?
Yeah, so we worked with AAA studios, and we worked with like single person game development.
Yeah, the single person or the small shops. And the more I think about it, and the more we talk to indie developers, there's just so much that goes into getting a game produced, more than just the coding, that I would love to have a resource, if I was going to develop a game, a resource like Stride PR to help take care of all those things that I don't even know about.
Yeah, because that's one of the big things. It's one of those things to where we provide a service to where you don't have to do guesswork. I've heard many stories of people like try to, essentially go it alone, as the famous game quote goes, it's dangerous to go alone, take this. We are the service we provide that, you ultimately need if you want to make it, because there are lightning in the ball scenarios. There are, small studios, or a person who developed the game by themselves had no PR and just kind of, released it out into the wild, and, it took off like wildfire. But those situations are, it's akin to winning the lottery. You're just
Mm-hmm.
kind of hoping and praying and wishing. But realistically, unless, a journalist at a big site just happens to, discover your game, or happens to follow you, and has enough, not only at a big site, they have enough power to push a narrative like, I love this, I want to cover this. And, they have the
Yeah.
ability to do that. Chances are, it could be years before anyone's even aware your game exists.
So, like at PAX East, then were you responsible for saying, okay, PAX East is where we should go, and I'll set this up and bring a couple games? I mean, who decided who was going to do what at PAX East, for instance?
Ultimately, it's always up to, the developer, the publisher, what they do or don't do. And,
Okay.
it's kind of like we offer services like, hey, these are the things we want to hit every year. We know you're gonna have, your PAXs, you're gonna have your Tokyo game shows, you're gonna have your Gamescom, and you're gonna have, your GDCs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Your game events throughout the year. And depending on what your game is or what you're trying to do, we recommend like, hey, it could really shine here, or hey, it could really shine there, or hey, if possible, maybe we should hit up everything. And we work with the developer with their goals, and we're like, hey, we try to maximize coverage and where they get the most visibility. For example, you don't want to be like, hey, let's go to this event that wouldn't benefit you. Let's go to
Right.
this one instead. Or like I
Mhm.
said, maybe all the events benefit you to get,
Yeah.
max coverage. And then, we talk to developer like, for example, like, hey, PAX East is coming up. the public will be there. You have a demo, the press will be there, let's show it. And then, they'll ultimately be like, yay or nay. And then, if it's a go, then, we work with them and getting the booth, the things, that everything's set up, setting up press meetings, appointments, and, helping manage, the physical booth. As you saw, I was there
Yes.
with the press and the public as well. And again, as I keep, reiterating, to make the game shine as best as it can.
Got it. I want to get into specifically about what you do and sort of how it gets started. Like if I called you up but in order to do that, I want to get a little bit of your origin story as well. So how did you get into PR and doing this? And what does that roadmap look like?
Well, so my journey started way back in yonder year at 2012 is where I say definitively my career started. I went to Texas A&M University. I was a pre-vet student, but somewhere along the lines, I figured the doctor life wasn't for me, and I've always wanted to pursue more creative
It's a tough one.
works.
Yeah.
So my senior year, I made a physical, real life, non-digital uh box of all my achievements and things that I done, and I applied for internships by mailing this box off to big game companies. And fortunately, Game Informer magazine emailed me back, and they liked what they saw, and I ultimately landed an internship there during fall 2012. I packed up, moved to Minneapolis, and I pretty much, that was right after I graduated. So I was like, I'm going to forgo even applying to vet school since I landed this internship, and just like
Yeah.
put all my eggs in one basket. So I went, had my internship, experienced snow for the first time in Minneapolis, a whole bunch of
Yeah, I was gonna
furs.
say Texas to Minneapolis. That's quite the leap.
Oh yeah, it was fine. I got there in September. The weather was moderate. I got to
Uh,
see fall for the first time. That was cool. And then sometime late September, mid October, the weather got below 30 and just kept getting lower and lower. And it was not a good time for me.
kept going, kept going. Are you still in Minneapolis? Are you still in
Oh
Minnesota?
no, I'm currently in Houston, Texas.
All right.
Back to Texas.
I'm not
So
saying I wouldn't move again where it snowed, but if I had the option, never again.
well,
So look, I just want to back up for
Chicago.
a second. Did you say you actually packed up things into a box, like a
Yeah.
physical box?
Yeah, Twitter existed, but it wasn't what we know it as today. Facebook was still very much the dominant social media platform. Instagram had maybe just became a thing. So, I always feel, the 2010s or the early 2010s is an interesting period in history where we're still in the future and we have most of the things we have now, but things were still very old school in that sense. So yeah, like
Yeah.
I made a physical
Yeah.
resume kit, like where it had physical paper copies of my resume, printouts of articles I've written,
Uh,
a USB
That
drive of
seems very
things.
creative to me.
yeah. That in fact, the fact that you did that, I think as a PR firm would get my attention or
Right.
someone needing PR. Sometimes that physical we talked to a marketing lead for another company a few episodes ago, and she did a few physical box things to either send to gaming outlets that they were working with or to that their PR could use, and that kind of physical thing can be a real differentiator. So I would love to see your physical kit. Do you still do that? I mean, do you still have
No,
your
so like
portfolio as
I
a physical?
I really honestly did that because I couldn't think of any other way. Nowadays, people have their websites, their QR codes and all those things. Those things just basically
Mhm.
really didn't exist, or at least
Right.
not exist in the way they did today.
Well, I think that's a cool differentiator that comes across
I
somebody's
think
desk.
you
They're gonna
were
pay
ahead of
attention.
your time.
Right. Well,
I
now
think that would be really popular right now.
right,
Yeah.
because it would be so retro, it'd be so different. Somebody would get a look at that
Yeah.
and go, wow, that's interesting. Gotta check this out. As
Yeah.
opposed to the next link after next link after next link of just clicking through the digital thing.
Mhm.
So that's cool.
Yeah, because I remember I couldn't find anyone's email addresses. I feel like, nowadays everyone's email is plastered everywhere. but everyone still had their physical mailing address like on the website. So I was like, well, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So you
so
did some writing for a while. Yeah.
it was good. That's what I was trying to do because I grew up watching game trailers a lot. I remember reading Tips and Tricks magazine, and I don't think I even knew the term video game journalist was a real thing. Like I just knew I
Right.
liked what these people do. They got to play games and talk about it in depth in an educational, informative way. And I remember thinking at a young age, I want to do that. I don't know what that is, but
Yeah.
that is what I want to do. But I grew up in an era where it's pretty much doctor, lawyer, engineer, and no other job exists apparently other than that.
Yes. But that's amazing to me because basically what you're saying is you envisioned this thing and you made it happen.
Yeah,
Right.
you know
You
what?
did what it took. You tried. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was. Honestly, it was just like because I remember I talked to my college counselor at the time, and I told her what I wanted to do, and she was like, "What are you talking about? What is that? That these words don't make sense to me." And,
You're fired.
and all my resources was just like, so I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to go to the source. I tell people nowadays, there's freelance writing, there's so many opportunities to try to get your foot in the door. There's these things, there's always these call outs and things. But again, like I said, Twitter wasn't really a thing back then. There wasn't video game freelance at that time didn't really exist. I mean, it did, but it wasn't what it was today.
Right.
It was kind of like you had to live in close proximity to where the place was. So, I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm not in, LA. I'm not in San Francisco. I'm not in New York. So I'm already both hands tied behind my back at that point.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Nowadays, you can, work from anywhere, but like back in those days, you had to be where the jobs, you had to be where IGN was, you had to be where GameSpot was, you had to, and where the studios were, and, a good 80%, if not more, was in San Francisco. So not being there, you were already leagues behind.
The journalists need to be where the developers are. So the writers need to be where the journalism companies are, and the developers are all where the tech is, and that's all in Silicon Valley. That's all where it used to be. Now it's really kind of spreading out. That's really nice. So if you got deep into journalism and being connected on that side, it seems relatively natural to me. So I'm not surprised then that from a PR perspective, getting into PR and then being able to like either maintain those connections or at least know what goes on the journalism side has to be really important. So how did you get to Stride then, and how did that transition?
So I had my internship at Game Informer, and then after I left, my tenure was over, came back home, and I had to enter the scary big real world. And again, so of course, my number one goal was apply at the big sites, the places, and hopefully land a job. I had to sustain myself until then. Started working office jobs, but then I started freelancing at anyone who would give me a chance to let me write. And then I started going to conventions, PAX, E3, which eventually evolved into a yearly thing. I would always go to PAX East, West. It was formerly known as Prime, but eventually became West. And then I started going to PAX South when that was a thing. And then I eventually hit the international market. I went to Tokyo Game Show, writing, producing coverage. I went to Gamescom in Germany, writing, producing coverage. But this was always on like a freelance or contract basis. I never broke into that full time, I got to pack up and move to San Francisco capacity. And so as I got older and I learned more, I learned more about gaming. I realized that, a game journalist isn't my only role in gaming. I learned, just a lot about the industry over my time, just writing for a decade or so.
Right.
And so I started to look at other avenues since I understood gaming, and like you said, I understood, the importance of gaming PR. And I was like, with my journalistic knowledge and just overall knowledge of the industry, maybe this is something I can tackle and, navigate the industry from a different way, because ultimately I just love gaming. I just want to be in gaming. And like I said, my ultimate goals and things, there's many, there's never no one route to take. And so I decided, just put my best foot forward, and I applied at Stride, and, by the grace of God, they offered me a position.
Yeah, that's excellent. And as I said, it seems like a natural connection from my perspective to go from understanding games journalism, being a writer, being at the shows, being connected there, and then a PR firm to say, oh, hey, here's someone who understands both sides. Here's someone that can potentially bring those skills to us and maybe even some of the connections and understanding how the conferences work and that kind of thing. As just as an aside, I started in pre-med when I was in college, realized that that wasn't for me. Also got into development and then started this career. I spent, like 25, 30 years doing business tech, and I still do business tech, but all along wanted to do, develop either game development, games journalism, play games, watch games, game trailers. I feel like in some
We can
ways
relate.
it's the same thing. And now that's what I guess that's what Seema and I are doing. So we've been talking about games for a little while, and we've got these couple little podcasts going on. That's I feel like this is our little contribution or our little experiment in talking about games. So it's been fun. Let's talk about some of those games. So you're obviously, like us, a gamer, and there's some of those games that Stride is working on. Those couple that we mentioned, No Place for Bravery and World of Horror. What other kind of games? Not necessarily even that Stride is working on, but what games do you have your eye on out there? What games are looking fun for you right now?
So if you ask me what will be like my ultimate goal, I would want to create games, not from like the coding side, but maybe like a storyboard artist, a lead writer
Mm-hmm.
position. That's something that like I feel in my heart. I would want to. That would be like my retirement job. That would be the job either I retire from or I do until the day I die.
Excellent.
Writing game stories, whether that's actually the lead writer, storyboard artist, from the creative side.
Yeah.
Just and that part of game development would be my goal.
Yeah, what kind of game and what kind of genre when you talk about writing? Would it be
Yeah.
horror, science fiction, fantasy?
It would definitely not horror. I am
Yeah.
not a fan of horror. I appreciate it for what it is. That's cool. Just I like to go to sleep and have like fun,
Right.
peaceful dreams.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
as well.
I've got my headset over there for VR. And a problem I'm having with VR right now and VR games is a vast majority of them think it's like really cool to stick you in some horror environment. Some of the best VR games are all like Half-Life Alyx, and here's zombies trying to eat your face, and here's it's like no, give me like a happy place.
I want to pick a flower.
Yeah. So I always
I'll
thought
shoot
games were
flowers,
amazing
but-
from an early age. But there was one game in particular that changed my whole perspective on gaming as a whole, and that's a game called Klonoa, specifically Klonoa 2, which
Okay.
is getting a remake next month, which I am uberly excited about, looking forward to, because I always feel it's a most people have not played Klonoa 1 or 2, but now you can
I have
in
not.
HD next month.
Okay.
Klonoa 2 was a game that I love so much that I wanted to inspire to make games like that. It's a wholesome game, wholesome characters, bright, colorful worlds. But the story, the character development, it's just insanely deep, deeper than a game like that has any right to be. People always be like, when you're young, everyone's like, oh, Shakespeare, Plato, and all these Greek philosophers and
you're like
English
Klonoa.
playwrights. Yeah, they make you feel, they teach you ethos and pathos and, the hero's journey. But Klonoa 2 was that for me.
That's awesome. And I'm looking at it on Wikipedia, and I see it's a platformer action role playing sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm intrigued now.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
This is exciting.
Most people have it, but when they announced the remakes, I was just like, yes. The world has heard my wishes for the past 20 odd plus years.
Well, that's
And so, did you play it on a PlayStation or?
Yeah, I played it on PlayStation 2 when it originally came out, in whatever year that was.
people don't realize there's a ton of story behind some of these games that we play. It could be, it could be an iPhone, a little iPhone side scroller shooting things, but you'll have these creators that are creating rich lore and story and a bunch of story elements. We talked to Mayhem Games last week, and they took an interesting turn, and this might be something for other people to learn from. They developed this game. It's a co-op puzzle escape room kind of game. It's really, really cool. But they developed a whole bunch of lore behind it. They took a detour to say, all right, well, we kind of really like that. And we've got some artists and these writers that can do a lot with that and sort of get that story out there. So they developed external content. They developed a video series that tells the story and sort of shows the storyboards. And they got an actor to like read out this story stuff of their chronicles. And so I love that. I think a lot of creators, even when they are thinking about whatever they're developing, get that kind of idea of what is going on in their world. And the best games always are informed by some kind of basis, some kind of lore. Getting into that, you coming up with a world, you coming up with that kind of lore, and then games sort of developing and evolving from that, that sounds like a great path for that to go.
Yeah, most definitely. Because, if you take any writing class, one of the first things they teach you is active writing is better than passive writing. That may not be true for every, thing you write, but that's the general rule of thumb. Active is always better than passive. And I feel that video games is the only place you can experience active storytelling because, you're in it, you're there.
Mm.
Sometimes you're literally driving the narrative and not just along for the ride. And so I'm like, because, movies, plays, books, I'm not saying they're not great. I'm not saying great stories aren't told there, but they're all passive forms of entertainment.
Right.
And we go deeper, a passive form of storytelling. Video game is the only active form of storytelling, which is why I feel like it's the best place to tell stories when done correctly.
That's spot on. We talked to the audio lead from Ubisoft Toronto working on Far Cry. His name's Eduardo. And one of the things he said is he came from movies where, it's obviously all about storytelling. But he said in movies is always about show, don't tell. And now things are evolving to play, don't show, to really understand and feel and be a part of those kinds of stories. So I love that idea of the advances in storytelling that you can get by making players be immersed in it and play it and make the decisions themselves and see the story unfold and get a feeling of the environments and getting a feeling of the lore and having the story evolve around them. So that's brilliant. I think you're onto something big there. And Eduardo thought it was the future of where things really need to go from storytelling in games even more and more too. So these games, so I say you're still at Stride and I did your dream. I came up with a game. And I did this in my head over the weekend. I invented a game. Somebody's gonna steal my idea, but I'll lay it out. So it's going to be a game kind of like Plants vs. Zombies, but the enemy, instead of being zombies, is loot boxes. And it's going to be called Loot Box Slayer. And the loot boxes are going to be coming and you set up your little turrets. It's sort of like tower defense. So that's my game. I decide that I'm going to do that. And maybe I get an artist friend to do some of the art and I code it up. And then I call you up and I say, I have no idea what goes on next. What is PR? What's the next step? What do I need to be doing? I'm half done with this game, O'Dell. So help me, O'Dell. You're my only hope. What happens then?
I'm speaking generically here, but it would be like, well, first and foremost, what are your goals for this game? Do you want it? Do you just want to make sure people play it? Are you trying to, maximize profit? Do you just want the world to know it exists? What are your main goals? And then, we work towards those goals. And, it's kind of like, you always got to think in the future. You got, you have your milestones, release date. That's a great place to start. Like the game when is the game going to come out? Once we, can figure when the game is going to come out, or at least around when, it doesn't have to be, the exact date. We work backwards. We can make a plan. It's like, okay, let me back up even further. We workshop with, sometimes we can even provide services of, feedback. Like, hey, I have this great game. What should we call it?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Let's figure out a
Oh.
name because you might be like, I wanted to call Plants versus Zombies, but not really, but cool things with turrets that are supposed to be the plants, but now they're turrets. You'd be like, that's great.
That's
Maybe we can
that's
make that better.
that's a terrible title. Yes, and no. Let's be
So
creative here.
we work on things, before we can even start, like something as simple as what should this game be called? What is this game's identity? We can help you focus that. And then from there, like I said earlier, we want to take as much work off as your plate as possible. So your main focus could be, just making the game as good as it can be.
Yeah.
Worry about perfecting your vision.
Got it.
And that
Got it.
way,
Well,
and then,
that
we
sounds
could
good.
literally, basically do everything else, in terms of branding, messaging, of course, this is a conjoint effort. It's not, we're taking the creative reins from you. Of course, I'll be like, I imagine it'll be like naming a child. Both parents have to come to some sort of agreement on,
Right.
from naming to how are we going to raise this child? When are we going to announce to the world that we're even having a child?
This is a good analogy.
Yeah.
And how do
fits.
we avoid certain pitfalls?
Yeah. How do we make
Right.
sure once the child is born that, they will continue along the right
You'll
path?
be successful
Right.
out in the world?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more like when you name the child, how do you avoid sort of unfortunate initials or secondary meanings that you hadn't thought of, or
Oh
you know,
yeah.
Yeah.
those kind of pitfalls.
So do you help with that?
Who would be a bad influence on this child and who should this child stay away from?
Yeah. Do you work with international companies for the one side?
Oh, yes, sir, all the
international
time.
developers.
Yeah,
And
all the
then-
time.
And I would imagine a big thing I would potentially need help with is if I want to take my game to an international market, and I know this works in the enterprise world quite a bit. I have no idea of localization. What is the name of my game? What is culturally does it land badly in various places? So do you guys work on that? Do you have sort of the expertise to go out there and say, no,
Oh, yeah,
Nova in Spanish means don't go. It doesn't go. So you don't name your car that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, when it comes to localization, ultimately, we're not the developer. We don't play the game in its entirety. We don't go through all, things of
Right.
that nature. But definitely when it comes to, again, with the names, we could be like, this name could potentially be bad in these markets for this reason.
Mhm.
Okay.
Versus this name, which could just be universally accepted. And when it comes to, marketing, Isbrid is an international client, actually. The one
Okay.
you're referring to. They're not based here in the States.
Got it.
And No Place for Bravery, the developer, they're a Brazilian developer.
Oh, excellent.
So
I think I knew
just,
that. Yeah, I talked to them for a couple minutes, and they seemed really fun.
Yeah, so
so
the client that you're familiar with, where you met me, both of those, even the developer of World of Horror, none of those companies are based in the States.
Absolutely. All right, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I knew that. But the internationalization concept, that it seems like something a lot of people would potentially need help with, no matter where they're coming from, and going outside of their own culture and area and zone and country, making sure that it lands well in other places. That's really, you need somebody with some expertise to be able to bounce those ideas off.
Because
So that
one of
makes
the
a lot of
searches is not only here in the States, you have your IGNs, your GameSpots, your Game Informers, your Kotakus, your et ceteras. There's also very big gaming outlets outside of the United States. The world is a holistic place. So,
Right.
we making sure we hit the big outlets in South America. We make sure we hit the big outlets in Europe. We make sure we hit the big outlets in, Australia. Well,
New
all the big
Overlords, that
markets,
big
we do
outlet.
our due diligence to make sure it hits. Now, obviously, if the game isn't releasing, in a certain region, we're not gonna, promote the game there for obvious reasons.
Exactly.
But,
Exactly. And then you can help probably coach that regional release as well, I would imagine. Now, one of
Exactly.
the things you sort of mentioned and touched on a bit, and I wonder how deeply you get into this as Stride, is you said if you want to make a lot of money or if you want your game to get exposure, do you get into monetization models and recommendations on monetization models and things like that?
Like I said, we could just, recommend the best strategies for our clients, but ultimately, what they decide to do or not to do is ultimately up to them.
Right, right.
But could you advise them, like, say I wanted to have loot boxes in my game, would you be able to say that's good, but then you wouldn't be able to roll out in these countries because loot boxes are not legal there?
What approaches to that is kind of like, I'll use a crypto as an example. Crypto
Yeah.
games. The games media is generally speaking not favorable towards those type of games.
Okay.
And in a situation like that,
Right.
all I can do is just make you aware of the climate. This is what the climate is currently.
Yeah.
What you
Mhm.
want to do, again, is ultimately up to you. Well, no matter what
Right.
game you want to make, no matter what game you want to do, we will do our best to make sure it shines as possible. But we will also make you aware of what the climate is and how things could be received when you do certain things.
Okay.
I would liken it to, a very real world event of like working with Johnny Depp. I'm not here to pass judgment on Johnny Depp, but I will make you aware of the circumstances surrounding him.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
and
Okay.
and ultimately, if you want to work with him, we will support you. We cannot stop you. But again,
So
it's just like anything, because ultimately the freedom is up to the developers. Like I said, we're there to make their lives as easy as possible. And sometimes that does include some counseling about just where the industry is at. What are the things they care about? What are the things they're not so friendly towards? And no matter what you decide, we will do our best to help you navigate that.
got
Because,
it.
truly nothing is ever
Mhm.
bad for our clients. Everything they want to do is good. We just want to make sure it's received as best as possible.
They can come up with, and probably less consultation on the monetization model themselves, but where is the public relations view of those kinds of monetization models? And you mentioned crypto NFT. There is some buzz around that right now. There's people talking about this. This is the future. And then there's a lot of press and there's a lot of climate that's saying, if you touch this with a 10-foot pole as a developer, we're going to hate you for right now because it's a terrible, terrible thing. Uh, where do you stand on NFT based gaming? Sort of looking into the future. Do you think it's going to be a thing? Do you?
Honestly, I don't know. That's just how I feel about when it happened. If it was one of those things like I just woke up one day and it was kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
That's. Do you
I feel
have a
that way
lot of?
too.
Yeah, exactly. Do you? Well, we don't need to talk about what unreleased projects are coming your way, but I would imagine there are both games out there that may be looking for PR, but are NFT based because people are just getting into that space, for one. And for two, when we talked to Lucia at Mayhem Games, she said they're not going to do that by any means, but they've had a lot of crypto NFT based technology companies coming to them and saying, hey, this is a way to go, that we can help you with this. We can do this. So it could be coming to a point where, if you haven't seen it already, I would imagine there could be a bunch of games like that coming your direction. That's got to be tough to navigate when it's a difficult, a negatively perceived aspect of any kind of what I'm doing with my game, whether it's the genre or it's the monetization model, or I'm using loot boxes, or I'm going down this NFT path. How does PR get around that? I mean, so say I do like the worst possible thing. It's got loot boxes and it's NFTs. It targets
Crypto.
and it targets children, and but we really want to make this game, and it sells nicotine, and we're sponsored by nicotine companies. I don't know. So, but we really want to do this. So O'Dell, help us out. What is there anything you can do there? I mean, how do you spin that?
I honestly, I'm not gonna speak on your example directly about
Right.
it supported all those things. All I can really say is there's always a market out there for somebody. Like we
Okay.
talked about earlier, like I do not like horror games at all.
Right. Okay.
But there is a market. There's a group of people who love horror games.
Sure.
Yeah.
With
Okay.
everything they
So
got. And
so your job is to find those people and connect the game with those people.
yeah, exactly. No matter what the game is, knock on wood, of course, I'm pretty sure someone out there could be like, oh man, here's the game that's about, the worst things humanity has to offer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But generally speaking, without, something being the worst possible thing that's ever walked the earth, there's always a market out there for someone. There's always an outlet that covers this type of games. There's always an audience for that. Things don't have universal appeal. Like, we talked about Elden Ring and, game difficulty. There are millions of people who look at Elden Ring and are like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, I don't care if you say it's game of the year, game of the century. No.
I played it for a little bit. I've tried it. I think it's beautiful. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a masterpiece, but it's not for me.
Yeah.
And
that's the beauty of games, because there's always, every game will always be for somebody out there.
Right. That's the flip side. There are these markets, there are these niches. And Lucia at Total Mayhem said this quite a bit. Their game is directed at a specific niche. It's co-op. You have to have two people. And you have to be able to communicate over voice because you're doing this escape room type puzzle working together. That's an example. The horror games are an example. NFT gambling. I'm sure there's people that want to get into it and try it and think it's fun and get entertained by gambling. That's great. Going after and finding the ways to reach those markets and get out to where those people are at, the media that they listen to, the news reviews and publishing websites, I could see a huge need for PR to help find my audience. Because I know they're out there. People buy these things. Help find my audience for my nicotine simulator NFT crypto game. And my audience is kids, to be clear. Kindergarten age kids.
So my question about all this is like, and for Max's game, when along the process is the ideal time to get PR involved in the first place? Like, I would tend to think if I was going to write a game, maybe I would want to get it all done so that I had something to show. But I'm getting the feeling that you'd say no, you'd want to involve PR much earlier in that process.
Oh yeah, no, as soon as possible, as soon as possible.
As soon as you get an idea, even.
I don't want to say that's too soon. But as long as your budget allows it, I say as soon as possible, as soon as you can, I would say maybe it needs to be more than just a word on a piece of paper. Maybe slightly
Game.
after
I wrote
that,
it down.
But as soon as possible, because especially in our industry where hundreds, dozens of games come out daily, weekly, monthly, you never want to be behind.
Right.
You never want to be in a situation where you realize, oh crap, it may be too late.
Right.
Or oh crap, I'm gonna have to play catch up, or we're gonna have to do things at a clip that maybe might be uncomfortable. Whereas if I would have got in a lot sooner, things could have ran a lot smoother.
I like the way you laid it out, which was the biggest milestone is probably release. But then if you talk to PR and the earlier you talk to them and get them involved in the process, you'll then create a roadmap, a timeline going forwards and backwards from release. And backwards from release, the further you can go, the more time you have to plan, the more time you can make sure that you're getting engaged in some of these big cons. Getting to PAX West. So say we wanted to go to PAX West. I've got Loot Block Slayer. It's gonna be I'm just developing it now, but I think I can get it done in a year. It's gonna release in January. But so that's 6 months. Wow, we're already halfway through the year. It takes months to get on the schedule, to get a slot, or at least months, if not 6 months, or like half a year to get into a place like PAX West. You can't just start a few months before release and think that you're going to get like a preview slot at some show, I would imagine.
I always think of you want to build up as much hype, wish lists, things for your game as possible. You want to give your game as much chance to succeed, because we live in a world of information to where you just can't, be like, hey, this game's coming out cool, and then never hear about that game until release date.
Right. That cadence of communication and understanding the right cadence, what's too much and what's too little, that I would imagine people need a lot of advice on too.
Yeah. So, you have, your announcements, you have your trade shows, you have your press coverage, you have your organic outreach, you have influencers who cover the game. And I'll use the example like Fall Guys, Fall Guys, someone's like, hey, this game's coming out. Hey, this game's cool. Hey, these people are playing it. And you want to, create this fever pitch to when your game drops, you're selling, people are playing your game. People want to play your game. People are talking about your game. And that doesn't, as I said, in the same way that an outlet writes about a game, tells the public, hey, this game's coming out. Hey, XYZ game, blah blah blah, this game. That's not by accident. That's by design.
Right.
Interesting.
All of that is by design. And we at Stride, do that intentionally when an outlet covers a game, when someone plays the game before release, when a game is shown at a trade show, when the game exists in the zeitgeist, when a game exists in your mind. All of that is by design.
Excellent. I think that's probably the most important thing for a game developer who's even potentially listening to this, or people to understand for how this works, is it's got to be by design, because if it's not, things fall off the radar, or things get oversaturated, or you hit it at the wrong time and then you're not ready for a release, or nobody hears about it. Just nobody hears about it.
Well, yeah, and the outlets and the media outlets, they're hearing from publicists, so they're not going to hear about your game that isn't
right
getting any publicity. Yeah.
And they have a tough job too.
If you don't do your part of the design, it won't happen.
So I would imagine the writers love Stride as well, because it's a hard job to try to figure out what. All right, I got it. Here's another. I'm sitting down at my desk today.
You mean the journalists?
The journalists, right?
Yeah.
What am I going to write about today? What's on the agenda? All right, I will scour the forums. I will look at Kickstarter, I guess. You know what? Let me call up O'Dell. O'Dell, tell me what to write. I would love that as a journalist, I would imagine.
Yeah, just for the record, no one calls me on my personal line and asks me what to write. But I will prepare press releases and send them their way. And make
Extra. We got some news here for you right here today.
Exactly.
Step right up. We're going to talk about no place for bravery. All right. Well, so two things. Any game developer you want to send our way that we should be talking to, because they would, we should get them on the podcast. We should talk about their game, for one. For two, do you do PR for podcasts?
Not to my knowledge, but I can get back to you on that. But we do for podcasts. Sometimes we'll get requests from podcasts. People see about a game coming out. They'll, like you said, they'll reach out to a game and they'll either, organically know because they received the press release, or they were told by, the developer, whoever, contact Stride. And, they'll reach out to us like, hey, we would love to have, developer XYZ or someone, on this game to come on our show and talk to us about it. And, and like, of course, we'll reach out to them and we'll be like, hey, super awesome podcast wants to talk about the best game ever made, 2023 edition. And, we definitely, work out things that way as well.
All right. And I'm kind of doing that right now. I keep talking to PR people and getting some things lined up. And it's great to have someone that understands both sides and can talk to the developer about the right time to do it. And that's kind of the conversation that I'm ending up having is with a couple of them, like talking with someone like Stride. Yes, I get that you want to talk to, this developer, this game that's coming out, No Place for Bravery, but they're in the middle of a development cycle right now. It's not necessarily the best time. Let's talk in 60 days from now, and then that's going to be when their new beta is coming out, and that would be a really great time for you to talk to them and them to talk to you. So it sort of helps slot even my side of the conversation into that kind of roadmap timeline puzzle, which is great.
Exactly.
All right, let's wrap it up with a little bit more of the future of a final thing. And you can pick between this here. What are you most excited about, either in the future of gaming or in the future of something that you're going to do in gaming? And I know you can't talk about quiet or projects going on right now with Stride, but Do you see something coming down the road that is going to be really exciting for PR, or just for as a gamer in general? What are you most excited about?
Something that I think that's really exciting that about gaming in general and in reference to the world is that as gamers, we understand the importance of games. There's still many people who you tell them you work in video games and they get a question mark over their head and they're like, doesn't make it game that makes money. I was like, well, let me tell you.
Right.
Now,
But
see here.
there's a lot of people now, and I'm referencing Miyamoto and even Jun Masuda, who was one of the creators of Pokemon, who has now stepped away from his role at Game Freak and is now a creative fellow at the Pokemon Company, which oversees the Pokemon brand as a whole. Games are becoming just huge IPs on their own go into, cards, movies, now attractions. Think of
Mm.
Nintendo Land, opening up at Universal. And that gaming is becoming such a part of our culture that they're I'm not escaping is not the right word, but branding off from their video game selves, like, with TV series and movies and all these things come back to the video game. And like I think the world is gonna
Yeah.
enter a space where all these IP and properties aren't based off, again, like I said, these aren't Shakespearean stories. These aren't, the Odyssey. These aren't things from, way back when. Our culture, our creativity, our stories are stemming from video games. These are where the great things that we see and, long for and own and go visit and, want to learn about, they're all based off video games. And
Yeah.
as time goes on, video games are going to become so much more important to the culture of the world as a whole. And I think, those who know, we see it and understand it. But people who don't, even look at they sell Fortnite clothes at Walmart.
Right. Right.
And,
That
as more time
idea.
goes on, the more things will stem from video games into our world. And I think will ultimately change how entertainment is just done from A to Z.
Right. I love that idea. And I think that, again, gets back to that migration from show, don't tell, play, don't show. This is play being the way to tell long format stories and immerse
Right.
people in a concept. And the way this kind of culture of storytelling is evolving is very, very rich. And yeah, and then you can still do all of these other things and spin off of it. You can write the books, you can make the movies, you can do the comics, you can do the animated series, and all of those both being inspired to create a game from those, but then more and more we're seeing the game spawning that kind of content because the lore and the concept and the what has been created in the game is so rich.
Mm-hmm.
That just seems like a really ripe opportunity to expand that interconnection between all of those. So do you think that you're going to be involved in some blockbuster movie projects? Do you want to? No
Who
Place for
knows?
Bravery, the movie?
I mean, maybe. I mean, honestly, who knows? Because I always tell people, even in my journey, like when I was trying to quote unquote work in games, it was more or less like you just kind of had to really want it. It was literally, like I said, you almost had to be in proximity to the job.
Right.
Mhm.
Like you had to just physically be around. And if you were around, there was a good chance, you could probably get hired on. But even, in those short years, now it's something everybody wants to do. When I was trying to do it, I had to, just kind of crawl and be like, drive halfway across the country, give up going to vet school, and, all this stuff. Now there's kids today who are like, this is what I want to do. Like, what
Right.
college do I need to
And
go
they
to?
study
Do I
it.
need to go to
Right.
college?
Right, exactly. The education infrastructure is there.
Yeah, and there's resources. Like I tell people all the time, I wish back when I was like 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, that the structure, the knowledge, the availability was the same back then. Oh, I would have had such a much better time.
Right. Well, this has been great. And I think that's a good view of the future and how all of this stuff is evolving. That we went quite a bit further into the future of our culture than I'd expected here, which is awesome. If people need to reach out to you and Stride and they need to call up O'Dell to figure out what they should write about, how do they connect to you?
Oh yeah, you can reach Stride. You can visit the website stridepr.com. All the information is there. About contacting us, trying to get us set up with your game, all that good stuff. But you can follow me at O'Dell Harmon Jr. on Twitter. My DMs are open, so if you have any personal questions or things of that nature, you can always reach out to me that way.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great
Thank you, O'Dell.
conversation.
Yeah,
We
this has
learned a
been
ton.
very interesting. Yeah.
We hope to talk again.
All right, thank you for having me, and I appreciate your time.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.